Hey guys, welcome to CS with Ian. So this video is going to be the first in my From Below to Pro series, and I think it's a really important topic. So one of the questions that I see asked a lot, I read Reddit, I go on ESCA, and people just sometimes ask me, since I'm a relatively higher tier player, is how to get better at Counter-Strike and how to get good at CS. And I think it's kind of tough to give an easy answer to that or a quick answer because there's a lot of depth to the game of Counter-Strike. It's not as it appears. If you take it for face value, people are good by getting kills and not dying a lot. You have a high KD ratio or whatever. But how that happens, there's a lot behind. So it's important that you understand what makes up skill in Counter-Strike. And I think there's a bit of a misconception out there right now, maybe not right now, but just ever, that skill is really, really, really connected to how well you aim in Counter-Strike. And a lot of people will just give the blanket answer of how do I get good? Oh, DM more, right? But the reality is there's a lot more to the game than that. I go on Reddit all the time and I see people saying, I DM for 2 hours a day and I have really good aim and perform well in DMs. But when I get into a scrim environment or a match environment or just a general, matchmaking game or whatever it is, I can't perform at the same level that I do in DMs. And the reason why is because there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes things that go into how well you play in Counter-Strike. Simple isn't the best player in the world because he has incredible aim. That's one portion of his game. But one of the things that makes him the best player in the world is that he understands how to create holes and exploit them using his incredible aim. He's very aggressive and he knows, if a team is doing this, he has an intuitive understanding of how to abuse that and take fights and not be punished for it. Similar to, a JW. So Simple does have incredible aim, but that's not the reason why he's one of the best players in the world. There's a lot of players with incredible aim that aren't able to make it to the echelon of a player that Simple is, right? So you have to understand that he has really incredible game sense too. And he has really good positioning and his movement's really good. Like those are all things that go into it. So the goal of this video is to be something that you can look at or listen to or whatever and help you break down what skill is in Counter-Strike and hopefully isolate areas that you might be weak at and can improve. So that's what I aim to do with this video. It might be a little bit long and it might also be kind of basic at some time, but I hope that you guys watch or listen to it for the most part because the rest of the videos I'm going to be putting out in this series are going to kind of be on the basis of this. They're going to be tackling some of the topics that I bring up in this and some of the things that I think that you need to improve on to be good at Counter-Strike and to get to that next level. So the first thing that I'm going to do is talk about mechanics. So one of the categories that I break down skill into is mechanics. And in the mechanics category, or mechanical skill or whatever you want to call it, this is where aim falls under, right? But aim to me is more than just one thing. To me, I look at aim as two different kind of categories, subcategories, or whatever you want to call it, right? There's your raw aim or your reactionary aim. And reactionary aim to me is a response to where your opponent is or where they are or where they peek you or where you're peeking and, maybe they're in a different area. That's your reactionary aim, okay? And then there's also your preemptive or predictive aim. That is things like crosshair placement, understanding what angles people could be in or what angles they, are common spots, that type of thing. So with raw aim and reactionary aim, this is what you're training when you DM a lot, right? It is your reflexes, basically, your reflective aim, where if someone appears on your screen, you just instinctively try and aim at them. That's what you're training when you're DMing for the most part. Okay. You're not training your crosshair placement. You're not training those type of things for the most part, because in DMs, people spawn at random locations. They're not consistent. Well, they're somewhat consistent, but they're not locations people will play all the time. They're weird locations that are just random. And that inherently, the way that DMs are made, inherently just trains your reactive aim. It doesn't teach you to have good crosshair placement. So if you do think you're bad at reactive aim, if you're not good at seeing an enemy then shooting him right away or aiming to him right away, not even shooting him, just aiming to him right away, then the way that you can train that and get better is by DMing and playing executes and retake servers and just playing the game a lot, right? Like that, there is an aspect of a grind to Counter-Strike to get to where your kind of level or your plateau with your aim is, right? Aim can always get better to a certain extent. Like you can be more consistent with your aim. But for the most part, like everyone has kind of like a ceiling that they'll eventually hit or plateau at. And improving the other things that I'm going to be talking about is how you eventually get better as a player. Your aim, I think once it reaches your plateau, you kind of level off. As long as you DM enough and just play enough, you'll keep it at that kind of consistent level for the most part. You know, everyone goes through slumps and high points, but you'll have a kind of baseline. So if this is something that you think you struggle at, that is something where you should be DMing more. You should be playing games more, because that is how you improve your reactive aim. Your raw aim. You want to DM. You want to play a lot. One thing that I do as well, outside of just DMing to improve, and I know a lot of other players do this, is play maps like aimbots. And I actually have I'll link it in the description, but I have a config where I'll just go into my own server. I start my game in 128 tick mode, and I'll just go into a map and I'll spawn bots that don't shoot back, but it'll help me kind of warm my mouse up without having to kind of, get shot in the back 100 times. So it's basically a DM. So I'll go on any map, Dust 2, Train, whatever, it doesn't matter, pick a map. And I'll just spawn bots that spawn exactly like they would in a normal DM online, but they don't shoot me. Because one of the things about DM that's kind of annoying is that you sometimes will get shot in the back over and over and over again. And, if you haven't played in a while, like a week or whatever, and you just want to get back into the game and kind of feel the comfort of the mouse again and get comfortable with that, sometimes it's a little bit easier to do it that way. So, so I do that as well. So I'll link it in the description if anyone wants it. Okay, so then to me, one of the other parts of aim that's really overlooked a lot of the time and isn't really discussed as aim, but it really is at its core, your aim, is your preemptive aim or predictive aim. And this is where your kind of mindset and your overall thinking influences how you play the game and influences how you aim in the game. It's things like your crosshair placement and pre-aiming common spots and understanding how to isolate angles so you're not exposed to multiple different areas, and what angles, when you're entering a site on, TSED, what angles do you need to be worried about? What angles do people commonly play? Understanding how to aim at those angles, not necessarily through the wall, but while you're entering a site or while you're going into a site or about to engage in a fight. That's actually a really important part of CS that isn't really talked about a lot and isn't really the kind of common mentality. People don't look at improving that unless you're a higher level player. And that's something that's very important in the game. The maps are static. They don't, for the most part, the maps are static. Angles are always the same, and people play pretty common spots, So being able to effectively pre-aim those spots and effectively understand, okay, if I'm entering this site and this has happened in the round, they're probably around this area, will actually help you a lot, being able to be in the general area of where an enemy will appear, right? So something that when I coach or talk to lower tier players a lot is that's one of the first things that I notice. They'll peek corners without really looking at anything or where they could expect an enemy to be. So it's very important that if you're an individual that thinks you're really good in DM, right? If you think that you can go in a DM and you're like just killing everyone, you're hitting a ton of shots, this is something that you should look at in your aim, that you can probably improve, crosshair placement, understanding where to aim based on how the round has developed, based on where the enemy is, and based on what's happening currently. If your teammate's engaged in a fight, understanding how to aim so that you can effectively either cover him or trade the kill. That type of thing. It also uses your mind a little bit. I was talking a little bit about how you have to understand where people are going to be. And sometimes that's dependent on the actual opponent you are currently playing. If you're playing against an aggressive player who likes to pop flash and then wide peek, or maybe not even pop flash, just wide peek when he hears contact, you should be recognizing that and understanding that, so that next time you enter that site or next time you hold that angle, understand these guys are going to be really fast to peek, or they're going to be really passive if they're a passive player, right? So you aim differently based on the opponents you're playing at. Now, obviously at some lower tier levels, like silver or MG or whatever, in matchmaking, the lower tier matchmaking ranks or middle tier matchmaking ranks, people won't really have like a consistent playstyle. So this doesn't necessarily apply to that. But when you get to a more developed level, like, the higher tier matchmaking, and then you get into the ESEO, open, intermediate, the competitive leagues, this will start to come in place. Certain players have a set playstyle or a comfortable playstyle that they will do. If you're taking Mirage on A, their A player might play very similar spots all the time. Or you're taking A on Mirage, he might play similar spots, or he might react to situations the same way. So understanding that and how to aim based on what they're doing is important. So how can you improve on this? Well, the way that I do it is I do basically 3 things. Okay, so the first thing that I would do is recommend playing in execute or retake servers. If you haven't heard of these servers, they're basically servers where you spawn. Okay, there's no like lead up into the round, but you spawn and you're executing onto a site. So you either spawn as a terrorist or a counter-terrorist. If you're a terrorist, you execute onto whatever site. It throws grenades for you automatically, so you don't have to do the grenade lineup. But most of the lineups are accurate, so it's another good way to learn the lineup without actually like just sitting in a server. But it'll throw grenades for you, and then you entry onto the site, and you have about 30 to 45 seconds to take the site. And the CTs, if you're a CT, you have to defend against the site take or rotate into a post plant scenario. So it's a really good way to train without playing a full game. Now, it's not the best. I wouldn't recommend only playing it, because sometimes people play stupid, or people go AFK or whatever. But it's a casual way. If you only have 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever that you want to train, and you don't have time to play a full game or something like that, it's a good way to train for those scenarios, for working on crosshair placement and working on how to retake and clear angles effectively, that type of thing. So there's a guy named, if you're from North America, there's a guy named SP Lewis that has WIF City servers, they're called. If you go to wifcity.com, I think is the website. I'll put it in the description in case I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's wifcity.com. He writes the retake and executes mods. He's a great guy, really nice guy, puts a lot of work into it. So check them out. They're really good. He's got a couple different locations and a bunch of servers. So it's a really good way to train that. Then what I do is I have a config that it will spawn bots and pre-aim spots. And there's also pre-aim maps, I believe, that you can find on the workshop, that will basically spawn bots in normal locations. So if you're running up catwalk on D2, it'll spawn them in the cubby and then bricks and the left side and then quad and all those different areas, so that you can entry onto a site as a T and understand if your pre-aiming and your crosshair placement is good when you're entering, right? So if anyone watched, I think E-League or something put out a video with Olaf Meister and Krims playing against each other in that type of scenario where they were racing for time, right? So that's a good way to do it. And the other thing that I would do is watch demos. Demos are very good for this type of thing. Both watch your own demos and watch pro players' demos, because one of the things is watching pro demos are good for certain things, but they also, it's a very high level of Counter-Strike. So people react at the pro level differently than they would at possibly your level. So don't take everything from that, but just kind of take minor things where it's like, okay, this guy entries this site this specific way. And sometimes they have set flash and stuff, and that won't be your case. So look at it more as like not a be all and end all, but something that can help you and enable you. The other thing I'd recommend doing is watching demos of yourself. If you watch your own demo, you could see the things that you do wrong and see that, hey, I'm actually clearing this angle really, really sloppily. I'm aiming at the ground or the bottom left corner when, the angle's, I'm very exposed before he's there, right? And that's something that you can pick up from your own demos that you don't necessarily realize when you're in the game, because there's so much going on in a game. You might be calming what you want to do, or you might be, just being really into it and thinking about what the enemy's doing. So you don't recognize it. So if you sit back and watch your demo in an environment where you're not fully engaged in what's actually happening, you can be a little bit more critical and observative and see like, okay, this is actually what happened that round. This is what happened next round and blah, 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 right? So those are things you can pick up from your own demo that help you and will show you if you're actually really bad at crosshair placement and if it's something you do need to work on. In addition to both your kind of raw and reactionary aim and your preemptive aim, is recoil. Now, this recoil control goes into kind of both these categories, obviously, because it doesn't matter. You could have the greatest aim in the world, but if you can't control recoil, you're not going to kill a guy a lot of the time. So recoil is a very important part of CS that I think doesn't get trained enough. I really recommend using the Recoil master map. Obviously, when you DM and stuff like that, it does help as well. But I would recommend like specifically working on your recoil as something you want to work on, because it's obviously everyone knows there's spray patterns in CS. You know, the game's kind of like RNG based, but it does have spray patterns that you can work on. So I would definitely recommend work on the recoil master map in the workshop. Do that for 15 minutes a day, and you'll notice results within like a week or two for sure in how you control your spray. It'll get a lot better, and it'll be like noticeably better. That's something that I think a lot of people don't work on, and they should. It's not fun. That's why people don't work on it. Playing a DM is much more fun, right? It's way more fun because you can kill people, you get to be involved, you get to be engaged. But it's not, if you want to improve, you're going to have to do things that aren't fun. You know, this is the old saying that, you know, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard or whatever. Like, this is akin to that, where, you know, if you put the time in to work on these things, the unfun things, you'll get better than other people, even if you're not naturally talented, because that's just how Counter-Strike is. It's a game that I think you can legitimately get really good at by putting time in and working on these other things that most people won't work on because they're not fun. So you know, deathmatching helps a little bit, but if you're going to work on it in deathmatching, I would recommend like actually trying to work on your recoil in deathmatching. So try and get spray transfers, try and, you know, spray a guy down instead of just tap him if he's standing still or whatever. Like that's stuff that you should be trying to work on actively, right? You know, you can even just sit in a server and spray a wall and try and get the bullet hole or the bullet deck holes to be in a consistent location, right? That's all things that you can do to try and work on recoil. So yeah, that kind of covers my aim category. You know, basically I break it down into two categories: your predictive aim and your raw aim. Most people only work on the raw aim aspect of it because the kind of like consensus is like, oh, raw aim's the big deal, but there's a lot more to it. You know, your predictive aim, if you have really good crosshair placement, you don't have to have incredible aim. You can be a good player by just having good crosshair placement and okay aim. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is movement. Movement's another part of the kind of mechanics of Counter-Strike that's really important. And I kind of break down movement into two categories. So movement to me is your general movement, which is how well you can just maneuver yourself around the map without anything interfering. You know, are you able to make jumps and navigate without any issues? Are you able to make, you know, pretty difficult jumps, or like consistently make average to moderately difficult jumps? That type of thing. Are you able to, you know, jump up Xbox on Cat and, you know, make the window jump on Mirage, that type of thing? If you're not able to do that, then you need to work on it. So the ways that you can work on that is by doing KZ maps. KZ maps really do help with that. Even though it's not really, KZ maps are a good way because it engages you. You want to beat a time, or you want to beat the map or whatever, right? So it's better than sometimes just jumping around on the server because it gives you a goal. And even though it's not directly on the maps that you would normally be doing and stuff like that, there's definitely a correlation between being able to KZ well and being able to move in the game well and jump in the game well and that type of thing. The other aspect of kind of movement maps is surf. Surfing's okay for it, but part of the problem with surfing is generally people that surf don't use the same settings when they surf as when they play the game. And you also hold your wrist differently and stuff. So it's good for air strafing and stuff, but it also isn't the greatest at kind of real world or real game movement, right? So surfing is somewhat good, but I would definitely recommend not doing it as much as KZing or just running around through the map. Going through maps by yourself in a server, again, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with aim. It's boring, but it is effective. If you're moving incorrectly, like you're over peaking angles or you're over strafing when you're trying to do something, you can go into a server and practice that angle, you know, without having to die when you're doing it wrong. And it's muscle memory, right? Like it's like aim when you're DMing, and it's like you know, just general stuff in life. You know, if you learn a specific way, you don't have to think about it, right? If you sit in a server and peak an angle 100 times, you know, and get the strafe timing right, you won't have to think about it as much when you're trying to do it eventually. So repetition does build muscle memory in games like Counter-Strike too. So I definitely recommend trying to do some of that if you think that your general movement's an issue. I do generally most people, one of the things is like most people have a pretty good read on their movement. They know it's a problem or they know it's not a problem. So most of the time, if you know your movement's a problem, this is how you improve it. You do something like that. I will be putting up more in-depth videos later on, but this is more of just kind of an overarching thing. So then the next part of movement is your movement under pressure. This is actually something that's really overlooked a lot of the time. And it's something where, KZ maps and stuff like that won't really help you that much because when you're in a KZ, you're not, taking fire from an enemy or anything like that. So the muscle memory from KZing and from general movement will help you a little bit. But it also has to do with how you handle pressure as a person. So this is something that I think most people aren't aware of as a problem. And I see people get kind of like panicky sometimes when they play, and you can see it in how they aim, but you can also see it in how they move. And most of the time, people will try and improve on the aiming aspect of it and recognize, I aim really panicky when I'm under pressure or when someone's fighting with me and blah, 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 right? But they won't try and improve on the movement aspect because most of the time you don't realize that that's actually what's hurting you sometimes too. People will, under pressure, start moving a lot when they're shooting, and that causes their bullets to go crazy, right? If you're moving a lot. So how to work on that is kind of difficult. It's more of a difficult topic because it's something that is developed over time and you have to actively work on. You have to look at your own games and look at your own play and say like, man, I am moving panicky when I'm engaged or when I'm under pressure. So you have to watch demos of yourself and see like, hey, I actually really do move a lot when someone's fighting me and it's kind of chaotic. So that's something that you do have to practice and work on. And some of that is the only way you can kind of work on it is doing things like real game environments, like retakes and actual just playing games, executes and retakes and playing games. So I think that you can also, some of that is like counter strafing. Counter strafing is something that I think people do wrong a lot. Steel has some videos out on it. I think maybe Daze does or something. They have some great videos describing how to counter strafe properly. It's a skill that you really should learn to do. Because I see a lot of people think they're counter strafing and they're actually like just screwing up their accuracy because they're not counter strafing properly and it's giving them weapon inaccuracy and they think, oh my God, why did that shot not hit? And the reality is, well, it's because you counter strafed wrong and you were actually still like fully strafing while you were shooting at someone. So your bullet inaccuracy or your weapon inaccuracy was going crazy. Another way to work on it is to plan out paths for yourself so that your movement's kind of set and get consistent ways to clear angles. This is not, it sounds very like rudimentary, but this is actually even done at like the higher tier pro level when you're planning out like how you want to take a site. People have kind of comfort paths or comfort lines, in racing, in like F1 racing, it's called racing lines where it's like a specific way to take a corner. In hockey, there's different kind of habits people have for, pressuring a net where they'll take specific angles of the ice. I'm Canadian, so I talk about hockey a lot, where they take specific ways to the net that other players wouldn't take. They take a different angle, right? So those are type of things that you can develop in your own game if you kind of plan it out and think like, how do I want to take this? How do I feel comfortable taking this? I'll take cat this way, and maybe another player would do it differently, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just kind of your personal comfort, how you feel comfortable taking angles. So that's kind of what I was talking about with movement. I think it's a topic that doesn't get enough. People see people like Simple and Forrest and Fallen and say, wow, their movement's so good. And they don't realize how they get that good. And it's not, they don't just get that good because they're just blessed with amazing movement capabilities, right? That's not how it works. They get that good. Simple has incredible movement because he plays like 120 hours of Counter-Strike every 2 weeks, right? Like he's putting in a ton of time in the game and he does DM a lot. He does go in servers and just run around a lot in KZ, right? Like those are the type of things that people will do that you don't see them doing because they might not stream it or whatever. But they do. And that's what you have to do if you want to get better at these things. Movement is something that you have to work on to be a good Counter-Strike player. You can't have really bad movement and be really good. And you can see it. Like if I took, a DMG or whatever and took his name off a demo and put Cold Zera or, Fallen or Device or whoever, name a pro player. And I just had them run around on a server and not really, maybe not fight people or not take a demo from like a pro game, but just have them like run around, you would be able to tell the difference in movement between the two players. And that's not because, you know, oh, the pro players have like this fundamentally amazing movement. It's because they've developed that skill over time, and that's something that you need to work on. And they've worked on that, and they've also played at a level where they get punished for not having good movement. So that is part of it, but you do have to work on it and build it and improve it, and it has to be something that you're consciously aware of.